What if the pain in your life didn't start with enemies, but with people who said they loved you? What if your survival in that house came at the cost of your identity? And what if the damage was done, not by what they did, but by what they normalized? Member 1. They're often the caregiver, the one who shows up, helps, supports, but only on their emotional terms. They help you, but always keep score. You feel watched. Every choice you make that doesn't include them is silently punished. Their control is invisible. That's what makes it so dangerous. You'll notice they need to be needed. If you become independent, they fall apart, not because you're selfish, but because they no longer feel powerful. They phrase guilt as concern. They disguise obligation as love, and they make your freedom feel like betrayal. That's how they bind you, with quiet guilt. You hesitate to make decisions without checking with them. That's not love. That's psychological conditioning. You were trained to seek permission instead of clarity, and over time you stopped trusting yourself because they never allowed you to. Your self-doubt isn't yours. It was planted. They use subtle emotional consequences to keep you loyal. Silence, cold distance, passive aggression. They never say, "Don't grow," but their reactions tell you otherwise. You become addicted to their approval, not out of love, but survival. That's the wound. You learned love must be earned. You second-guess your wins. You downplay your dreams, because in their world, your success without them is abandonment. That's how you were trapped. You were given support that always came with a string, and every string was tied to silence. Member 2. They play fragile, but it's calculated. Their weakness is a weapon. They dominate the room not by force, but by collapse. You are constantly walking on eggshells, because any truth you speak might break them. But it's not you they fear. It's their loss of control. They center every conversation around their wounds. When you express pain, they outpain you. You are never allowed to be the one hurting, because their pain always eclipses yours. It becomes emotional blackmail. Don't you see what I've been through? Their history becomes a prison you live inside. You end up apologizing for your boundaries. You shrink your voice to preserve their comfort, and in doing so, you disappear. This is not kindness. This is emotional erasure. They've taught you that truth is dangerous because it disrupts their narrative. Their memory is selective. They forget what hurt you. But remember everything you did wrong. That's how they stay innocent, and you become the villain. For simply telling the truth, you carry the weight of the relationship because they won't. You become the parent to your parent, and when you try to leave, they weaponize collapse, illness, sadness, helplessness. But they're not helpless, they're manipulative, and their manipulation wears the costume of fragility. You weren't too harsh. You were just the first one who dared to stop bending. Member 3. They don't yell, they vanish. Emotional absence is their power move. You disappoint them, and suddenly they stop speaking to you. No closure, no conversation, just a wall of silence. You're not being punished by rage, you're being punished by erasure. Their silence conditions you. You begin associating conflict with abandonment. You'll do anything to keep peace, not because you're weak, but because they made conflict feel like death. This kind of absence is not passive, it's intentional. They know silence is your trigger, that's why they use it. You were trained to chase, to beg, to explain, and the more you did, the less you felt human. Their love became a leash, only released when you returned to obedience. That's not distance, that's domination. They don't have to say, "You hurt me." They just remove themselves and let your anxiety fill in the blanks. And when they return, they pretend nothing happened. That teaches you, your pain is imaginary, your fear is your fault, and your need for repair, too much. This is how emotional starvation works. You accept crumbs and call it care. You get addicted to their return, even though they were the ones who disappeared. This is the trauma cycle. You long for what hurts you, because it's the only thing that ever returned. Member 4. This one doesn't seem toxic at first. They're funny, charming, socially magnetic, but when you're alone with them, you feel small, not because they yell, but because they mock. They turn you into the punchline. They insult you in front of others, disguised as jokes. You laugh to survive. You smile through the sting, because if you show it hurts, they'll say, "You're too sensitive." But it's not sensitivity, it's humiliation. They test your limits through humor, and when you protest, they frame it as your failure. You become the one with the problem, not them. You stop expressing, you start censoring, because being authentic became dangerous. You dread family events, not because of what might happen, but because of what will be said. They know your insecurities. They use them as entertainment. That's not family. That's psychological sabotage. They thrive on dominance disguised as personality. They want to be the most liked, even if it means you're the most wounded. This isn't light teasing, it's consistent erosion. You begin to internalize their words, not just what they say, but how often you don't defend yourself. That's where the damage happens. Not in their cruelty, but in your silence, because every time you let it slide, you slowly slide away from yourself. Member 5. They don't yell, they don't guilt, they stay neutral, always, and that's the problem. They are the avoider. The one who watches dysfunction and says nothing. They call it peace, but it's passivity. They let harm happen and protect their comfort instead of your safety. They avoid conflict at all costs, not because they're calm, but because they fear discomfort more than injustice. You were hurt, and they stayed quiet, not once. Every time. They watched it all and kept their distance. That wasn't peacekeeping. That was betrayal through silence. You reached for protection. They offered explanations. You asked for truth. They offered neutrality, but neutrality protects power. It never protects the wounded. They weren't absent, they were compliant. You learn that speaking up won't save you because no one will back you. That shapes your identity. You silence yourself because you were always silenced, not by enemies, but by observers. They tell themselves, I stayed out of it, but that means they stayed out of saving you. They avoided conflict and handed you to it. You learned to internalize pain, not because you were weak, but because no one ever stood beside you. That's how generational pain survives, not through overt abuse, but through people who watched it happen and chose peace over protection. If you saw someone in this video, it wasn't your imagination. It was your body remembering. You weren't broken. You were conditioned. And now you see the pattern. You feel the fracture, and that is the beginning. Don't just survive your family. Become the one who breaks the cycle, silently, fully, and forever.